People don't know how time flies when you get old. I'm 95, and the last thing I remember, I was 80.
At 100 years old, Dick Van Dyke is finally ready to pull back the curtain on a century of Hollywood secrets. While the world knows him as the man with the permanent smile, there is a list of people he is not ready to forgive, even at the end of his journey. From silent partners who vanished to legends who let him down, these relationships tell a story that never made it to the screen. Join us as we explore the untold drama behind the smiles and the specific names he is leaving out of his final farewell. Mary Tyler. The partnership between Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore is legendary, standing as one of the most beloved pairings in television history. For 5 seasons, they played Rob and Laura Petrie with an effortless chemistry that made viewers believe they were a real couple. However, the true story behind their bond is far more complex and emotionally charged than the perfect marriage seen on black and white TV screens. Their off-screen relationship was defined by a deep, unspoken affection that they could never officially share, creating a lifelong what-if for both actors. In the rehearsal hall, a unique kind of intimacy grew between them. They spent countless hours every day practicing lines, perfecting dance routines, and building the intricate physical comedy that made the show a hit. During this intense time together, Dick developed a major crush on Mary. She was young, incredibly talented, and shared his specific, goofy sense of humor. They were perfectly in sync. But life outside the studio was not as simple. Because Dick was married at the time, and Mary was focused on her growing independence and career, they both maintained strict professional boundaries. They made the difficult choice to channel their real-life energy and attraction into their fictional characters. This created a strange, bittersweet reality where they felt more married and connected at work than they often did in their own homes. They shared their best jokes, their most creative ideas, and their most vulnerable moments within the walls of the set. Yet they left as nothing more than friends at the end of every day. This daily restraint took an emotional toll as they played out a perfect life together that they couldn't actually have. Years later, Mary Tyler Moore famously commented that their lack of a real-world romance was a terrible waste. This simple, honest phrase hit Dick very hard. It forced him to reflect on the years he spent hiding his true feelings behind a mask of comedy. Realizing that the person he cared for so deeply might have felt exactly the same way brought a heavy sense of regret. For Dick, the memory of Mary isn't just about a successful co-star. It is about a lost possibility and a love that was never given a chance to grow. Interestingly, this hidden longing is exactly what made the show a masterpiece. Because they were both suppressing real emotions, that natural tension leaked into their performances. When Rob looked at Laura with pure adoration, or when they shared a quiet, tender moment, the audience wasn't just seeing good acting. They were seeing two people who genuinely loved each other but were forbidden from saying it out loud. This performative longing gave their fictional marriage an authenticity and a spark that other sitcoms simply didn't have. Even now, at 100 years old, Dick sees those old episodes as a beautiful but painful record of a love that was very real, even if it was never lived. While Mary was the love he couldn't have, his relationship with Rosemary Clooney was a different kind of heartbreak, involving professional jealousy and a friendship that slowly went cold. Rosemary Clooney was already a major star when she joined the cast of The Dick Van Dyke Show. Because of her fame, everyone expected her to be the most important woman on the set. However, things did not go as planned. Instead of Rosemary being the center of attention, Mary Tyler Moore became the breakout star. This shift in the spotlight created deep hurt feelings and professional tension that lasted for years. When the project began, Rosemary expected to have a leading role. But as the writers realized how talented Mary Tyler Moore was, they gave Mary more of the story. Rosemary found her role shrinking, which made her feel invisible and unimportant. It is very difficult for a legendary performer to stand in the background while a newcomer receives all the praise. This situation was made worse by hurtful comments behind the scenes. The show's creator, Carl Reiner, once made a joke comparing Rosemary's appearance to Mary's. Although it was meant to be funny, it was deeply insulting. It made Rosemary feel that her talent and hard work were no longer valued. She felt the industry was moving toward a younger type, and she was being pushed aside. Dick Van Dyke saw this happening and felt a lot of empathy for her. He was the star of the show, but he felt helpless to change the direction the writers were taking. He was caught in the middle of a silent war. He wanted to celebrate the show's success, but he could see the sadness and anger in his friends' eyes. He noticed that their friendly chats during rehearsals were replaced by cold, formal nods. Because of this professional pain, the warm friendship between Dick and Rosemary faded away. They started as close partners, but Rosemary eventually became distant. Her anger over her shrinking role affected her bond with Dick. He had to watch a great connection turn into a chilly professional relationship. For Dick, this was a very sad lesson. He admired Rosemary's talent, but he realized that in show business, success for one person can mean heartbreak for another. Even though he didn't hurt her on purpose, he still carries the weight of that lost friendship. He sees it as a reminder of how unfair fame can be when the spotlight suddenly shifts to someone else. While the loss of Rosemary's friendship was a gradual cooling, the next person on the list broke Dick's heart by vanishing without a single word. Phil Erickson. Long before the fame of his own TV show, Dick Van Dyke was one half of a comedy duo that defined his early years in entertainment. His partner was a man named Phil Erickson, and together they created a unique act called the Merry Mutes. The name was very literal because they performed entirely without speaking. Instead, they relied on funny faces, exaggerated physical movements, and recorded sounds to make people laugh. They were inseparable, performing every night in small, smoky nightclubs and dreaming of making it big. For Dick, Phil was far more than just a co-worker. He was a best friend and a brother in the difficult struggle of early show business. They lived on very little money, often sharing meager meals and splitting every travel cost to stay afloat. Dick shared all his deepest hopes and dreams with Phil, truly believing their silent act was their golden ticket to a better life. But just as they were finally starting to get noticed by bigger theaters and more influential people, something shocking happened. Without any warning, argument, or explanation, Phil Erickson left the act. He didn't say goodbye or give a single reason. He simply vanished from Dick's life overnight. This sudden disappearance hit Dick very hard, leaving an emotional scar that never quite faded. He felt completely abandoned and betrayed by the person he trusted most in the world. Because there was no conversation and no closure, Dick spent years wondering what he had done wrong or what had gone wrong with Phil. The silence of their comedy act had suddenly become a permanent, painful silence in their friendship. Dick was left to handle their scheduled shows all by himself, forced to find a new path forward, while still mourning a partnership he thought would last forever. This was Dick's first real heartbreak in the world of entertainment. It taught him a harsh lesson that the business could be unpredictable, and that even the closest relationships could end in an instant. This event changed how he handled his entire career from then on. He became much more cautious about who he partnered with and how much he trusted people professionally. He realized that in the fickle world of fame, he ultimately had to be able to count on himself. This ghosting by Phil created a protective shell around Dick. While he stayed friendly and kind on the outside, he was always quietly prepared for the possibility that the person standing next to him might leave. This fear pushed him to develop the incredible solo skills that eventually made him a global legend. But the sting of being left behind by Phil remained with him for the rest of his life. He learned early on that even when the audience is laughing, the stage can be a very lonely place. Wait until you see how this feeling of being held back or left alone continued when Dick met the mentor who gave him his biggest break, Carl Reiner. Carl Reiner was the person who gave Dick Van Dyke the opportunity of a lifetime. Before they met, Dick was a talented performer, but he was not yet a superstar. Carl had written a script for a television show based on his own life as a comedy writer. When he saw Dick perform, he knew he had found the perfect person to play the lead role. This led to the creation of The Dick Van Dyke Show, which became one of the most successful sitcoms in history. Because Carl was the creator and the boss, he naturally became a mentor to Dick. guiding his career and teaching him how to succeed in the high-pressure world of television. Even though Dick was very grateful for this big break, the relationship began to feel complicated. Because the show was so closely based on Carl Reiner's own life and ideas, Carl kept very tight control over everything that happened. Dick often felt like a guest on his own show rather than the person in charge. When Dick had his own ideas for jokes or scenes, they were often unheard or rejected by Carl. This meant that Dick's creative freedom was constrained. While the world saw him as the face of the program, behind the scenes, he felt he was simply following someone else's instructions. Years later, after their first big success, the two men tried to work together again on a new show. However, this time, the project failed. This failure made the lingering resentment from their earlier years even stronger. Dick found it difficult to navigate the mix of deep respect and quiet bitterness he felt toward Carl. He admired Carl for his genius and for helping him become famous, but he was also frustrated by how Carl had limited his growth as an artist. It is a very hard thing to be thankful to someone for your success, while also feeling that they held you back from being your true self. This situation provides a clear look at how mentor-mentee dynamics can become strained. When a mentor helps someone become successful, the person they are helping eventually wants to grow and make their own choices. If the mentor does not let go of control, the relationship can suffer. In Dick's case, the very person who gave him his career was also the person who made him feel like he couldn't fully express his own creativity. Success brought them both fame, but it also created a lasting tension that stayed with Dick for many years. While Carl Reiner limited Dick's voice in the studio, a different legend would let him face public embarrassment without saying a word to help him. Walt Disney. For most actors, working with Walt Disney was the ultimate dream. When Dick Van Dyke was cast as Bert in Mary Poppins, it felt like a magical opportunity. He believed in the project so much that he made an incredible sacrifice. He agreed to play the role for almost no money. He wasn't looking for a big paycheck, he simply wanted to be part of a movie that would bring joy to families everywhere. However, the dream soon faced a difficult reality. Bert was supposed to have a Cockney accent from London. To help him, the studio hired a voice coach, but there was a major problem. The coach was Irish and didn't actually know how to teach a proper Cockney accent. Because he was given the wrong training, Dick's accent in the movie was not very good. When the film came out, critics and audiences, especially in England, mocked him. They called it one of the worst accents in movie history. Even though his singing and dancing were brilliant, the laughter about his voice overshadowed his hard work. The most painful part for Dick was the silence from Walt Disney. Walt was the most powerful man in Hollywood, and Dick expected the studio to defend him. He hoped they would tell the public that he had simply followed the training they provided. Instead, Walt Disney said nothing to protect himself. Dick felt completely isolated, standing alone while the world laughed at him. He realized that even though he had worked for free out of loyalty to Walt's vision, that loyalty was not returned when things got tough. This experience changed how Dick viewed the magic of Hollywood. It taught him that fame can be very lonely, and even the biggest legends might not have your back. He stopped seeing the movie industry as a magical place and started seeing it as a business where you have to protect yourself. His trust in big leaders was damaged, and he became much more cautious about the people he worked with. Despite the embarrassment, Dick showed great resilience. He didn't let the criticism ruin his career. Instead, he used it as a lesson to be more careful with his own preparation in the future. He learned that he had to be his own protector because, in the end, a famous name or a big studio wouldn't do it for him. This experience forced him to grow up and face the often cold reality of being a global star. Now, let's look at the person Dick found it the most difficult to face in the mirror every morning. Dick Van Dyke himself. While Dick Van Dyke spent decades making the world laugh, the person he struggled most to get along with was himself. To the public, he was the perfect, clean-cut father, but behind that famous smile, he was dealing with serious personal problems. At nearly 100 years old, he has realized that the hardest part of aging is learning to live with the mistakes he made when he was younger. When Dick became a superstar in the 1960s, the pressure was immense. To cope with the stress of his busy schedule and the expectation to be perfect, he began to rely on alcohol. For a long time, he was a secret alcoholic. He would perform brilliantly at work, but as soon as he got home, he would drink to forget his worries. This secret life caused immense pain for his family. Success in Hollywood came at a high price. His struggles led to personal mistakes and affairs that made him feel like he was living a lie. In the 1970s, Dick became one of the first major celebrities to enter rehab and speak openly about addiction. It was a brave move, but stopping the drinking was only the first step. He continued to struggle with deep guilt over the hurt he had caused his loved ones. He blamed himself for losing control and felt he had failed the people who truly knew him. Now, at 99, Dick has a unique perspective. He has said that his personal battles with addiction and guilt often feel more significant than his awards. When he looks back, he doesn't just see the applause, he sees the moments where he wished he had been a better man. Living a long life has forced him to decide if he can finally forgive his younger self. He has learned that while you cannot change the past, you can change how you feel about it by choosing honesty over perfection. His century of life reveals that even global icons carry heavy what-ifs. By reflecting on these complicated relationships and personal battles, he isn't being spiteful. He is finally finding peace by being honest about the cost of fame. Stay tuned to see the full list of names that tells the true story of a Hollywood legend, Margie Willett. Margie Willett represents a poignant chapter in Dick Van Dyke's life, one defined by the harsh contrast between a humble beginning and the crushing weight of global fame. Their story started far from the bright lights of Hollywood in Danville, Illinois. They were high school sweethearts who were so short on cash that they decided to get married on a radio show called Bride and Groom in 1948. The show paid for the rings, the honeymoon, and even the household appliances. It was a practical start for two young people in love, but it set the stage for a life lived in the public eye, whether Margie was ready for it or not. As Dick's career exploded with The Dick Van Dyke Show and Mary Poppins, the couple moved to Los Angeles. This transition was brutal for Margie. While Dick flourished in the spotlight, Margie found Hollywood shallow and alienating. She was a private person who preferred the quiet life of the Midwest. The pressure of being a Hollywood power couple took a severe toll on her mental health. She felt like a ghost in her own life, watching her husband become a legend, while she felt increasingly invisible and out of place. Their domestic life became a quiet battlefield of parallel addictions. Dick has been very open about his long struggle with alcoholism during his peak years. At the same time, Margie began relying heavily on antidepressants and tranquilizers to cope with her anxiety and her dislike of the celebrity lifestyle. There were two people living under the same roof, both using substances to numb their respective pains. They didn't have big, loud fights. Instead, they experienced a slow-motion tragedy of drifting apart. They became strangers who shared a house and children, but no longer shared a common reality. The ultimate fracture came with a deep personal betrayal. In the mid-1970s, Dick began a relationship with Michelle Triola. For a long time, Dick lived a double life, staying officially married to Margie while being romantically involved with Michelle. He later described this period as being filled with writhing guilt. He knew he was hurting the woman who had stayed by him since he had nothing, yet he couldn't pull himself away from his new life. This led to a very long, painful separation that finally ended in a quiet divorce in 1984. Beyond the fame and the affairs, a deep, private grief always sat between them. Early in their marriage, they lost twin daughters to a miscarriage. In those days, people didn't talk openly about such losses or go to therapy to process them. That unaddressed sorrow acted like a shadow over their remaining decades together. Even though they had been divorced for over 20 years, when Margie passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2008, Dick was devastated. He admitted that even with all the distance and the mistakes, losing her felt like losing a part of himself. Wait until you see how this cycle of guilt and fame repeated itself with the woman who eventually took Margie's place. Michelle Marvin. Michelle Triola Marvin entered Dick Van Dyke's life at a time when his public image was perfect, but his private life was crumbling. They met because she worked as a secretary for his agent. The attraction between them was immediate and very strong. Unlike his first wife, Margie, who hated the spotlight, Michelle was comfortable in the world of show business. However, because Dick was still married, Michelle became the other woman in a very public and complicated way. Their relationship was surrounded by drama from the very beginning. While she was living with Dick, Michelle was also involved in a famous court case against her former partner, actor Lee Marvin. She sued him for financial support, even though they were never married. This case created the legal term palimony. Because of this, her private life was in the news constantly. Dick stood by her during this time, even though it was awkward to be the partner of a woman who was suing an ex-boyfriend for money while he himself was still technically married to someone else. Once Dick and Margie finally divorced in 1984, many people expected Dick and Michelle to get married. They stayed together for 30 years, but they never actually had a wedding. The reason was mostly psychological. Dick felt a huge amount of weight and guilt from the failure of his first marriage. He was afraid that if they got married, the relationship might change or fail, just like the first one did. So, they lived in a state of limbo. They were a couple in every way that mattered, but they never made it legal. Even after the scandal of their affair faded, the fact that they weren't married kept them in a bit of a shadow. The end of their story was very sad and full of reflection. In the late 2000s, Michelle was diagnosed with lung cancer. Dick stayed by her side and supported her through her entire illness until she passed away in 2009. After she died, Dick felt a lot of internal conflict. He realized that he had spent 30 years with a woman he truly loved, yet he never fully committed to her in the eyes of the law. He had to live with the fact that he kept her in a secondary position for 3 decades because of his own fears. Now, let's look at how Dick's own children felt while their father was caught between these two different lives. The neglected children. Dick Van Dyke is often called America's dad because of his warm and funny roles on television. However, as he approached his 100th birthday, he became very honest about the fact that he wasn't always there for his own 4 children: Christian, Barry, Stacy, and Carrie Beth. While he was busy becoming a superstar and filming long hours at the studio, his children were growing up. He has openly admitted that he neglected them during those years. His career was his main focus, and when he wasn't working, he was struggling with a serious alcohol addiction. This meant that his children often had to share their father with the rest of the world, and they frequently got the version of him that was tired or struggling with his own demons. His relationship with his son Barry is a particularly interesting example of how they tried to fix their bond. Barry followed in his father's footsteps and became an actor. For 8 years, they worked together on the television show Diagnosis: Murder. On the screen, they played a father and son who were very close. In real life, this job was like a bridge. It gave them a way to spend time together every day and talk to each other as adults. It was a professional way to fix a personal gap. However, it was also difficult for Barry. It is hard to forge your own identity and be seen as an individual when you are constantly working in the shadow of a legendary father. A major turning point for the family happened in 1987 due to a heartbreaking tragedy. Dick's granddaughter Jessica, who was the daughter of his son Christian, passed away at only 13 years old from a rare condition called Ray's syndrome. This loss was a massive shock to the entire family. It forced Dick to stop and look at his life. He had to face the reality that he had missed so much time with his kids while they were young. This family tragedy made him realize that fame and career success could never replace the time spent with the people you love. It pushed him to try harder to be a present father and grandfather. Now that Dick is 100, the family dynamic is in a unique place. He is navigating a lot of guilt over those missed years, but he is also very grateful that his children are still in his life. One of the most emotional parts of this situation is that his children are now seniors themselves. Some of them are in their 70s. When Dick looks at his kids, he sees people who have lived entire lives, have had their own careers, and are facing old age. This highlights just how much time was lost to his fame and his past struggles with drinking. It is a powerful reminder of how long it can take to heal a family. Dick Van Dyke's Century of Life reveals that even global icons carry heavy what-ifs. These stories of unspoken love, professional stings, and personal battles show a man far more complex than his cheerful characters. By reflecting on those he wouldn't want at his funeral, he isn't being spiteful. He is finally finding peace by being honest about the cost of fame. It is a powerful lesson in self-forgiveness. Enjoyed this? Hit like, comment below with the story that surprised you most, and subscribe for more celebrity breakdowns.